Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Raluca. I am the Adult Programming Specialist at the Algonquin Area Library. Tonight, I am joined by cookbook author Emily Pastor from West of the Loop. Emily will guide you through the essentials of water bath canning and share tips on making delicious fruit spreads and pickled vegetables. She also prepared for you a handout that I will email everyone after the program. The presentation will be recorded and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel tomorrow sometime. This is a Zoom webinar, so your microphone and camera will be turned off. As an attendee, you can enable closed captioning and ask questions through the chat or the Q&A feature. I will now turn it over to Emily. Thank you, Emily, for helping us get ready for winter.
Hi, everyone. There we go. So we've got two cameras going today, and as a result, it's sort of a slightly complicated technical setup, but we're making it happen. Let me make sure I've got the video on for both. And there we go.
It's working. Wonderful.
Yay. Hi, everyone. Raluca, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to start off by chit-chatting, and then the reason we have two cameras is because I want to be able to talk to you guys, but I also want to be able to show you really what I'm doing. So that's why we've got both cameras today. So thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you to Raluca for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here with you all. So what we're going to be talking about today is water bath canning. And when you think about canning, I imagine this is probably what you might be thinking about. It's that big pot of boiling water on the stove, maybe a mother, a grandmother, a father, an uncle, someone in your fast, or maybe you've just read about this, but this is a way to preserve fruits and vegetables, whether you grow them yourself, you get them at the farmer's market, or even just at the supermarket. You can preserve them and make them shelf stable so that they would not need to be refrigerated. And I'm going to walk you through the whole process this evening, and I'm going to talk to you about equipment needs. As Raluca said, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I want to really enable and empower you guys to feel confident doing this particular technique in your own kitchens. And also, the handout that you will be getting is going to go over everything I talk about tonight and provide some recipes. So don't feel like you need to frantically jot down notes or anything, because you'll be getting a very thorough handout. But let's start off really quickly. So as I just said, water bath canning is what we're doing tonight. So next to me, you can't see it, but I promise it's there. There is a big old canning pot filled with water, and it is ready for me whenever, and you guys whenever we get to that portion of the process. So water bath canning is a very safe, very easy, accessible method of home food preservation. It is used for high acid foods. Now, already you might be thinking, well, how am I supposed to know what high acid foods are? And I get it. But I think I can explain this really simply. So the kinds of things that you can make and preserve using this method that we're doing today are things like jams, jellies, fruit spreads, preserves, and then on the vegetable side, pickled vegetables. Now, why is that? Because again, it has to do with that acidity level. Most of our fruits, not the tropical fruits, but most of the fruits that you would be likely to come across, say, at the farmer's market, the stone fruits and berries, those kinds of things, are high in acid naturally. So they are safe to turn into jelly and can. Vegetables tend to be low in acid, things like cucumbers, green beans, carrots. So that's why we add the vinegar to them and pickle them essentially when we're canning them this way. And by introducing that vinegar, you get a pickled sort of finished product if you like that tangy vinegar taste. But also, again, it is a food safety issue. So why is it? Very quickly. So it's the B word, what I like to call the B word, which is botulism. So botulism is obviously a scary thing to contemplate. The good news here is botulism, the microorganism that causes botulism, cannot live in a high acid environment, period, full stop. So if you are doing this method of canning, this water bath canning, and you're making these certain types of products that we're talking about, jam, jelly, pickled vegetables, you do not need to be concerned about botulism because you are going to be making things that have a high enough acidity level that that microorganism can't exist. It can't survive. And then the other parts of the process, the heat that we're going to talk about and other things, are going to kill any other possible bacterias or, bad guys that could make these products not shelf stable or perishable or otherwise go bad. So I hope that's reassuring. Very quickly, and just to elucidate this point a bit further, the other type of canning that some people do is known as pressure canning. So that requires special equipment, and you use both heat and pressure to preserve foods. And that is a safe method for low acid foods. So people use that even for things like soup or meat or fish, for vegetables that aren't pickled, that don't have vinegar in them. That is not what we're talking about today. It's not something that I do. It is very, very important for food safety reasons that for the people who do that they follow every possible safety precaution, because that is something where botulism can live in that lower acid environment. And so you have to take other precautions to make sure you're not endangering anybody. But again, just to really to emphasize, not a concern with us today. You are not going to poison people with your jam, I promise. Okay, so let's get started. Now we've kind of got that off the table. And I'm going to sort of be talking you through this process and demonstrating it at the same time. And what we're going to make today, and it's going to be one of the recipes in your packet, are pickled green beans. They are also known as dilly beans. This is an example of what the finished product looks like. Put that in the light. So some beautiful green beans. You can see some garlic in there. They're in a vinegar brine. And this is something I made earlier this summer. And they've been canned and they're shelf stable. They are in this canning jar. This seal is a vacuum seal. So look what I can do. Okay. Is anyone gasping in their kitchen? I can ship this across the country to my brother or to my mom. It is, as I said, shelf stable. It is vacuum sealed, and it is good this way, shelf stable up to 1 year. So I did this earlier this summer. It'll get eaten before the year's up. Don't you worry. Now, as you just saw, in terms of equipment needs, what you need are, and it's really not a lot. So this is something that you can sort of get into without having to invest in a lot of specialized equipment. One of the things you absolutely need are canning jars. So this is an example of, there's some mason jars, the ball jars. You can find them at Jewel. You can find them at Ace Hardware. Do not buy them at Michael's or a craft store. They're desperately overpriced there, but Jewel and Ace Hardware are both excellent sources. So the typical ball or mason jar has got 3 parts to it. It's got the jar, it's got this ring, and then it has a lid. Okay, so these are separate, the ring and the lid, guys, right? So the jars and the rings can be reused over and over and over as long as they're in good condition, but just knocked one over. But these lids, as you guys can see, this has got a sealing compound here. These lids are designed to be used one time for canning. They can continue to be used for storage or other things, but in terms of having them seal, to keep something, vacuum sealed and shelf stable and preserved, they are designed to be used one time for that. So you want to always make sure you're using the cans that are designed for water bath canning, not an old mayonnaise jar or something like that. They come in, this is a pint-sized jar. We're going to be working with these today because typically vegetable pickles we put into a pint-sized jar. This is an 8-ounce jar or a half a pint, and that's typically what we put jam in. So this is some strawberry rhubarb jam that I made also earlier this summer. Same thing, guys. It is completely sealed and shelf stable. And so you guys can get a sense of like, they make bigger sizes, they make quart sizes, they make smaller sizes, they make 4-ounce jars, but these are pretty. This guy, just to show you one thing, if you notice, this is a wide mouth jar. This is a regular jar. So you can see that this is a little bit of a different shape, but basically they still hold a pint. So nothing to worry about there. The other thing you're going to need is a large pot. And your pot is going to need to have some kind of rack or insert or something in it, excuse me, to lift your jars up off the bottom of the pot. So I'm going to give you, I have a big pot next to me, my big canning pot, but I want to show you guys this small pot just as an example. This is a little asparagus steamer pot. You guys can see, and see how it's got this little basket in here? Something like that is what you need. You do not want your jars, you don't want your glass jars sitting directly on the bottom of the pot, which is on the stove. One, the jars could crack. That's part of the problem. The second reason is we want water, that boiling water we talked about, to be circulating all the way around the jars, above them, on the sides, and even underneath. So that's another reason we need to elevate the jars off the bottom of the pot. Canning pots come with a rack in them. So my big pot that's next to me here has a rack that's in it. If you don't want to run out and get a canning pot, you can use any big pot you have, and just, you can, if you have a steamer basket, if you have those like silicone trivets, anything that can sort of serve as like a rack and elevate your jars, okay? And those are the most important things you need. I'm going to be using some other equipment tonight. This is a jar lifter. It goes this way. Everybody wants to have it go this way. It goes this way. And this is a handy dandy tool because we're going to be taking wet jars out of boiling water, and so they are hot and slippery. And so that's a great tool. This is a funnel. Once you have a funnel in your kitchen, I promise you'll wonder why you never had a funnel in your kitchen before, but that's easy to come by. And then the last thing is this little tool, and he has 2 jobs, and it's much easier for me to just to show you when we get to that part of the process. So I'm not going to bother to explain him right now. Okay. Next to me, as I mentioned, is a very large pot of my canning pot. It's got a rack in it. In it are 4 empty jars, and it is filled with water. The jars are in there because I want to start with warm jars. People often ask about, do I have to sterilize the jars? And that seems intimidating. And the answer is no, you don't have to sterilize your jars. But you do want to start with clean jars, obviously, and you want to start with warm jars. Why is that? Well, we're going to be putting in these jars either boiling hot jam or boiling hot jelly or boiling hot brine in this case. And if you put something that hot into a cold or room temperature jar, again, it could crack. So it is always good to start with a warm jar. So when I'm starting a preserving project at home, what I will do is I will just get my big canning pot out. I will put the empty jars in, I'll fill it with water, and I'll get it on the stove. That way, when I need it, my jars are in there, they're ready, they're warm, and they're easy to fill. And in fact, that's what we're going to be doing next. So, let's get started. Oh, I'm going to grab my green beans. I feel like I have everything within arm's reach, and then I forget like one thing. So give me 2 seconds, because I'm going to grab my green beans. See, they were close by. Okay, so I have a beautiful colander here of just green beans, or just from Jewel, nothing too fancy. And what I'm going to do, and this is exactly what I would, this is exactly how you start at home. So remember I said I have those warm jars in this pot of water next to me. I'm going to use my handy dandy jar lifter. I'm taking out the jar right now. Okay. So this is my jar. It is, trust me, very hot and very warm. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to fill it with the green beans. Yes, these are raw. Okay, because at the end of this process, as you're going to see, I'm going to they're going to spend about 10 minutes in boiling water. And that's how we're going to get that vacuum seal on our jar. And we're going to use the heat to kill any baddies or spoilers. So they don't need to be cooked because they're going to spend, as I said, 10 minutes in boiling water. Now, green beans, of course, cook quickly. You guys know that from home. And I'm going to unpin this version of myself so that you guys can be looking more at this version. Remove pin. Okay. All right. So now you guys can sort of see what I'm doing. So like I said, I put the jar on the side just because that's just personal preference. I just find it a bit easier to load up that way. So as I was just talking about, these are raw green beans. But if you were making something that was a bit firmer, took longer to cook, say you were pickling cauliflower, which, by the way, delicious. If you've never had pickled cauliflower, absolutely delicious. One of my faves. I might blanch the cauliflower very briefly because they take longer to cook, as you guys know. But again, with these green beans, they just go in raw. So I'm just packing them in. And I've trimmed them and washed them already, obviously. Now, there's a couple things. You'll notice that every so often I'm going to stop and kind of like shorten one of these beans. Why is that? Well, I want to talk to you about a couple really important parts of this process, important considerations. So we do not want to fill our jars to the tippy top. We want to leave some room at the top of the jar. We call this room the headspace. Why do we need to leave this room? Well, one of the things that's going to happen, I'm very OCD. I'm just looking for some really good beans here to pop in. So what happens is just like I'm doing now, you fill your jars up with whatever you're making that day. It might be jam, but today we're doing some pickled veggies. So I'm going to fill these up with our green beans and we're going to put some flavorings in, and then I'm going to add a vinegar brine to them. And they're going to then go into our boiling water bath. And they're going to spend some time in there. And what happens in that time is really, really critical. So there's two things going on. One is the heat from that boiling water. That heat needs to penetrate all the way to the center of each jar to kill any, as I said, bacteria, spoilers, other baddies. Okay. So one thing you need to think about always, and every good canning recipe needs to tell you this: how long does your product need to be in the boiling water? Typically for jams, it's maybe 10 minutes. Typically for pickles like these, it's going to be 15. Okay. And it could be even longer for a denser product. Tomatoes are something that I get asked about all the time because there's so many people out there growing wonderful garden tomatoes, and congrats to you because that's awesome. And they want to be able to can their tomatoes. Tomatoes are dense. They need even longer in the boiling water, could even be like 20, 30 minutes. So, but your recipe will tell you if you're following a good recipe, and you should always be following a good, trusted, tested recipe when you're canning. So these green beans are going to spend, as I said, about 15 minutes in the boiling water. That's going to be enough time for that heat to penetrate all the way to the center, kill any bacteria, anything possibly that had gotten in there. But the other piece that we need is this piece. How are we going to get that vacuum seal, right? So that these things are shelf stable and I can keep them downstairs in my little pantry, or I can ship them across the country to mom. Literally, you guys, I'm not even kidding. I shipped 12 jars of jam to my mom. She got them today. She's on the East Coast. She gives them to her friends at Christmas. So that's what I do. Anyway, we need that vacuum seal. And the way we get that is in the boiling water. If you guys can cast your minds back to 10th grade chemistry. I have a senior in high school, so 10th grade chemistry was only a couple years ago for me. When things are heated, what happens to them? I know you guys know, they expand, right? So when we put our jam, pickles, whatever it is in our boiling water, it's going to expand. If we have filled our jar all the way to the tippy top, when it expands, you can imagine what's going to happen. It's going to overflow. So we need to leave a little bit of breathing room, if you want to think of it that way, in our jar. And that is called, in the business, the headspace. And again, different products need different amounts of headspace. Maybe a jam only needs 1/4 of an inch, but a pickle might need 1/2 of an inch. And again, your recipe is going to contain this very critical information. Now, you guys remember I showed you this cute little dude earlier. See these notches? Everything I do is like in the mirror. Do you guys see these little notches? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Each of them measure 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to use this. You're going to see really soon. I'm going to use this to measure our headspace and make sure we're leaving enough headspace in our jar. But that's one of the reasons why if you see me kind of trimming some of these green beans, I need them to not be too tall and not stick up. So I'm just filling my jar. I'm working quickly before my jar cools down too much. Obviously, I'm chit-chatting much more than I would if I were just at home because I'm here with you guys and we're talking about it. So I'm packing these veggies in, and I want to pack them tightly, but I don't want to damage them. Now, the flavorings are also going right here in the jar. And this is where, and I know I was just emphasizing moments ago that it's really critical to follow recipes, and it is, and I do want to emphasize that because you're going to need to know things like the headspace and how long stuff needs to, your products need to spend in the boiling water, and you're going to need to know the correct ratios of vinegar to water if you're making pickles, or sugar to fruit if you're making jam. So it is important to consult, good, tested, reputable recipes. But if you are a cook who likes a bit of creativity, you do not have to despair. There is room for creativity in this process, and it really has to do with those flavorings. So we're making dilly beans, as I mentioned. So we're going to be adding some dill seed. That's how we're going to get that dill taste, if you look like a dill pickle or anything else. Dill is a wonderful flavoring, very common in Eastern European cuisine, Scandinavian cuisine, Jewish cuisine. So we're going to add some of our dill seeds. We're also going to add some garlic. So I've got whole, and you guys saw in the finished version of this, we had some lovely big old clove of garlic right there. So I'm just going to pop in, while I'm thinking of it, a clove of garlic. I'm going to add some of my dill seeds. They look like that. You don't, if it's earlier in the summer than it is right now, feels a little bit like summer. I guess it's starting to cool down, but we certainly had a warm fall, haven't we, guys? Beautiful. I'll take it. In the summertime, sometimes at the farmer's market or maybe in your garden, you will find dill heads, which are like the flowering heads of the dill. They can also be used for, in this kind of canning for pickles. But you don't want to use that like frilly, those frilly fronds of dill that you see at the grocery store. They will not work. So if you can't find those dill heads, for the rest of the year, the dill seed is the way to go. So we put in our dill seed, we put in our garlic, and then this is where, again, you can have some fun and some, creativity. You like spicy food? Add some hot, add a little dried red chili. I'm going to add a dried red chili right now. Can you guys see that? There he is. I'm going to pop him in there too. We're going to have spicy dilly beans. My family's going to enjoy that. So things that are kind of hearty, like seeds, we put in those dill seeds. Those are good seeds, spices, but not things that are delicate, like those, like delicate herbs and whatnot. You don't want to add those. They will sort of turn to mush over time, and just not, and also, in the sort of boiling water situation, not be super appetizing. Okay, so let's say we've done this. I could, if I were at home, I am at home, of course. If I were on my own, I might try to get a few more green beans in there, just because I like to, but I like a challenge. But let's stop here. And what we're going to do now is I have over here our brine. It's in this pot. This was boiling just a short time ago. So we want it to be boiling. It is equal parts water and white vinegar. So again, just basic, super basic distilled white vinegar. I get questions all the time, what kind of vinegar to use. The most important thing that you need to check about your vinegar is it needs to be at least 5% acidity. Now, okay, I'm going to cough because I just inhaled the vinegar, you guys. Put the lid back on that for a minute. My guess is you've never checked your bottle of vinegar to see what acidity it is, but this distilled white vinegar, if you look, I promise you, right here, ingredients, distilled white vinegar diluted with water to 5% acidity. That's what we're looking for. Distilled white vinegar is going to be your best bet. It's inexpensive. It has a nice clean flavor. It's not going to sort of alter the flavor of your preserve or your pickle. The only other vinegar I tend to use really is occasionally I'll use apple cider vinegar if I am looking to add that bit of sweetness to what I'm making. So if I was making maybe a pickled carrot, a pickled beet, I might want that additional sweetness from that apple cider vinegar. But otherwise, distilled white vinegar is the way to go. So equal parts water and vinegar in here. and of course, salt. Now, I also get a ton of questions about what kind of salt. Any kind of coarse, a kosher salt, a pickling salt is fine. You want to avoid any salt that is iodized. Table salt is typically iodized. And we just don't need that iodine flavor, that sort of metallic iodine flavor in our preserve. So just look for a like a coarse kosher salt, and they do have a product typically marketed kosher salt. That's fine as well. Okay. Now you guys can see I've put my funnel here on top of our jar. I'm gonna just move these out of the way for a second so you can really see what I'm doing here. Okay. So we got our jar, our veggies, our flavorings. And this is our brine, our vinegar brine. It is very vinegary, trust me. And I'm just gonna ladle this right in. But remember, we're not filling it to the top. I'm looking for about a ½ inch of that headspace at the top. So once you start to get close to the top, you wanna stop. And that's where this little gizmo comes in handy. So remember I was telling you, I want to hold this up against something where you can see these notches. Each of these notches is 1/4 inch. So I can rest them right on the edge of the jar. One notch, 1/4 inch, but we're looking for a ½ inch. So I'm going to go down to the second notch. Okay. Now it's not quite, the brine is not quite up to that level of a ½ inch. So I'm just going to add a smidge more just till I'm getting it there, that ½ inch. So headspace, it's a really important concept. You don't want more space than this. You don't want less space than this. Okay. Oh, and now I'm going to, all right, guys, forgive me, but there's going to be a little bit of background noise because I'm going to turn on the burner that's next to me. And so it's going to be like a little bit of a whirring sound, but I'm a loud talker. It's going to be okay. Can you hear that? The whir. So what I want to do now is I'm going to, so I filled it up, as I said, to a ½ inch, right? Now, this little gizmo, we used him a second ago to measure. We're going to use him again. He does double duty. What I want to do is I want to get rid of any air bubbles that may have come into the jar. So I'm going to take the other end, not the end with the notches, but the other end, and I'm just going to slip him in my jar. And I'm just going to sort of just slip it around the edges and just release any air bubbles that may have gotten in. Now, the next few things that I'm going to talk to you about have to do with making sure our jars seal at the end of the process and that we get that vacuum seal that enables us to do this fun little party trick. And also that's what makes sure our jars are in fact shelf stable. So why are we bubbling the jars? That's what we call it when we sort of do this, get out the air bubbles. Well, if there's too big of an air bubble in there, it might prevent the jar from sealing. Typically after I bubble the jars and release any air bubbles, I'm going to measure them again for that headspace, because sometimes you might have released a lot of air bubbles and the brine level might be lower than it needs to be, but here it's still looking pretty good. Now, this is an important step. I'm going to take just a clean cloth. I'm going to wipe off the rim of this jar. I don't want any residue or anything on this jar that could come between the jar. You have to remember, everything's sort of like a mirror, and this sealing compound. That's how, one of the ways we're going to make sure our jars seal. So we want to just wipe that off. More important when you're doing jam and you might have like a sticky residue of type of thing. Now, I'm going to do something here that's just like my personal mishigas, my personal crazy. So it used to be the case, stick with me here, that the nice people at the ball company told us we had to heat up our jar lids. And that was part of the process. And then a few years ago, they said, no, actually, you don't have to heat up the jar lids anymore. But I still feel like I need to heat them up. So I just dipped my lid into the boiling water and just get it a teeny bit warm. I'm going to pop that on top, right? You guys can see that. And then I'm going to take the ring, right? That's the third piece. And I'm going to put it on, but I'm not going to do it super, super tight. I'm just going to do it up until I feel that first bit of resistance. So I'm twisting, and then the minute it starts catch it and I feel that first bit of resistance, I stop. Because remember, in that boiling water, right, the contents of this water, of this jar, are going to expand. That's one of the things that's going to happen that's really important. And when they expand, what happens? The oxygen that's in this jar is pushed out. Okay? This is really important because the oxygen is what causes things to spoil or break down or otherwise sort of decompose. So they expand. First of all, as we talked about, the heat, right? The heat from the boiling water is going to penetrate all the way to the center of the jar. It's going to kill bacteria, baddies, spoilers, anything that we don't want in our yummy pickles. They're going to expand. They're going to push out the oxygen. And then when I take them out of the boiling water at the appropriate amount of time, what happens when things cool down? They contract, and then you're going to get a seal. I just did that, but hopefully it'll really happen in the water. I did it. You get a seal, and now your jar is sealed. Okay, we've killed the bacteria. Oxygen can't get in or out. It's vacuum sealed, and that's how you have a safe, shelf-stable product. So let's get this guy right back in the boiling water. And again, this normally does not take so long. It's just that I was talking and also trying to demonstrate everything that, and talk through everything that was happening. Now, I talked about a minute ago how different, I'm just going to get out another jar for you guys. So we just talked a minute ago about how the jars need to spend, a certain amount of time in the boiling water. And that timer, we're going to do 15 minutes on these guys. It starts when the water is boiling. So if you had boiling water and then you were taking jars in and out and you had the top off and now your water's not boiling anymore, as my water is not boiling, I had sort of turned it off because it kind of makes this loud noise and I didn't want it to, oops, I'm trying to make it hotter. There we go, ding, ding, ding. I didn't want it to be super, super loud, so I turned it off. I can't start my timer yet, even though I've got a jar in there because the water's not boiling. So the timer, that 15 minutes, doesn't start until our water is in fact boiling. So let's keep going here. I'm gonna just do another one while I keep talking so you guys can, again, just sort of see the process. Now, this process is how you make vegetable pickles, right? Vinegar pickles. Fermented pickles, another story, completely different process. Happy to talk about it. Happy to come back one time, Raluca, and do a demo on fermenting pickles if there's interest. But today we're doing vinegar pickles. So that's when we have that vinegar brine. And any kind of vinegar pickle you want to do, whether it's cucumbers, carrots, beets, cauliflower I mentioned, delicious, you can do using this method. The method is absolutely the same for jams, fruit spreads, that kind of thing. Oh, I see. Is there a question? Let me take a look. Do you add any sugar to the brine? Great question. It depends on the recipe. So if I were making a pickled beet, maybe something a bit sweeter, maybe some kind of pickled onion, and I wanted it a bit sweeter, I could add sugar to the brine, but I don't for this one. This one was, as I said, vinegar, water, salt was all that was in this brine. So again, it really is going to depend on your recipe. It's not necessary from a food safety point of view, but you might want it, again, depending on your recipe. So, there's a lot of people from Eastern Europe in our community, a lot of Polish and Czech people in the Chicago area. I have a Polish extraction myself. And they're sweet and sour are sort of, sweet and sour foods, very, very typical for that part of the world. They love their sweet and sour. So there's definitely you could be making like I say, like a pickled beets, a sort of sweet and sour type of thing. Maybe you want to add some sugar to the brine. Excellent question. Keep the questions coming, guys. So this method is really the same that we do for jam. Now, jam takes a while, and I really am not able in the time we have today. We've got someone chiming in who says she's Romanian. She loves the sweet pickles. Is that you, Raluca? Are you Romanian? That's so cool.
Yes.
Romanian is a Romance language. People don't know that.
I know they think I speak just like Bulgarians or Russians, but we actually speak like Italians and Spanish people. Yes.
I'm a lifelong Francophile. I was a French major in college. I love Romance languages. Yeah, so French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian. Those are the 5 Romance languages, guys. We're off track, but we're having fun. So fruit spreads, jams, jellies, those kinds of things. The methodology that I just taught you, where we fill the jars and we leave headspace and bubble the jars and we wipe off the rims and we put them back in our boiling water, all of that, it's the same. That's how you would do if I were making jam today. That part would all be the same. I would, of course, instead of having these vegetables and instead of having brine, I would have this pot would be full of boiling hot jam. Again, that takes a while, so more time than we have for this type of a demo. You will have a jam recipe in your packet. So that hopefully will give you some guidance if that's what you are really looking to make. The thing about jam, so very little in this process can go wrong. And I hope you guys can see how really not hard and straightforward this process is that we're doing. The thing about jam is things can go wrong with jam. And I don't really mean from a food safety point of view. I mean from a jam point. Jam can be undercooked, in which case you have fruit syrup. You don't have that spreadable gelled texture that you're looking for. Jam can be overcooked, and then you've got something that's like rock hard. And I always tell people, cut it up into little squares, toss it in some sugar, call it pâté de fruits, and now you are super fancy. So everything is just marketing. But if you really want a jam and you ended up with something other than jam, you're going to be bummed out. So that's the key thing about jam. And jam is complicated because to get that spreadable, jammy texture, we need the interaction of the fruit, the sugar, the acid, and then, of course, something called pectin. And I don't certainly am not looking to be intimidate or scare anyone off by talking about pectin, but and pectin is just a naturally occurring substance that gives fruit and vegetables their structure. Some are high in pectin, some are low in pectin. This is high in pectin because it's firm, it snaps, right? These green beans. I wish I had just snapped better eating these. I'm just gonna eat that later. So imagine with fruit, so there's different amounts of pectin. So I like to say to people, what's a fruit that you'd be willing to put in your backpack, walk around all day, and then still eat it at the end of the day? My guess is you're thinking apple, okay? What would be a disaster? A peach. Disgusting, right? Well, apples are high in pectin, peaches are low in pectin. So again, with jam, to get that gelled texture, that spreadable jelly jam texture, it has to do with the interaction of the pectin that's naturally occurring in the fruit, the sugar, the acid, and all those things. And some jam and jelly recipes will have you add additional pectin, which you can buy in a powdered form or a liquid form. Other ones don't, and they just have you cook the jam for longer. That's sort of the way around that. But the sugar is really, really important. I get a lot of questions about, can I do low sugar jams or no sugar jams? Can I make jams with honey or other sweeteners other than just like, refined white sugar? And the answer is yes, but it's complicated. And you have to do reduced sugar jams. You have to use a special process. You have to use like different pectin that's specially designed for that. Not my favorite. So I just embrace the sugar and just, it's delicious and it's homemade at least, right? So that's the good news. But anyway, I raise all of this because, as I said, the thing about jam is the technique for preserving your jam is identical to what we're doing today. But cooking the jam is a bit more involved and has some more possible pitfalls than cooking, than this process, which is, as you guys can see, really straightforward. So I added some garlic before I forgot to our dilly beans. I'm going to add some of our dill seed. Remember, we talked about that. And I'm going to add 1 or 2 of these hot peppers, these dried red peppers. They're a fun thing to add too. So we're going to have a little bit spicy. Okay, so while we were chit-chatting And by we, I mean me. I did a whole nother jar. Now let's do the brine again. Okay. Same thing. Ladle our brine in. We're going to leave that ½ inch of space at the top. Looks close, but it might need a little bit, teeny bit more of the brine. I think it does. It's not quite there. I'm measuring, right? ½ of an inch.
Emily,
Obviously,
we have
you
a
don't have one of these
question.
gizmos.
Hi,
Oh.
sorry, I scared you. So we have a question. They ask, Mary is asking, does the water cover the jar and the lid in the water bath?
Absolutely. Great question, Mary. Thank you so very much. Yes, I know you guys can't see, but in my canning pot, the water is several inches above the top of the jar. So imagine this, you guys, big pot, there's a rack in the pot, the jars are sitting on the rack, so they're elevated over the bottom, off the bottom, and the water is several inches above the top of the jar. Okay? Great question, Mary. Thank you very much. What was I just saying right before that? Who remembers? So, right. Oh, I was going to say, if you don't have this little gizmo, first of all, let me just say really quickly, you can buy as a pack, like a 3-pack, this guy, the jar lifter, and the funnel, okay? They sell these 3 pieces of equipment together, not an expensive item as you might imagine. But if you don't have one of these, just use a tape measure and try to measure, like I said, half an inch. Okay, my water's vigorously boiling, to the point that I don't think I can even dip this lid in there. Woo! So as I was talking, I hope you guys saw that I forgot to bubble the jar. See what happens when I'm distracted. I'm gonna bubble this jar. We're gonna measure it again. We're gonna wipe off the rim and then pop this top. Okay, that was bubbling the jars, remember. Measure it again. Still looks pretty good. Wipe off that rim. Don't want any residue that could possibly interfere with this sealing compound, right? Okay, pop that lid on, ring, tighten just until we first feel that bit of resistance, and then and then into the water it's gonna go. My water is in fact boiling quite vigorously. Find a spot for this guy. Problem is I've got some other jars in there, and so it's taking up the room. Pull this empty jar out, put this full jar in. Good. Now, because my water's boiling, I can start my timer and for 15 minutes. 15 minutes is just about the end of our time, so we may or may not get to see if those jars did in fact seal, and if I was being a good canner today. But you guys, I hope, got a good sense of the process from watching me do that a couple of times. Now, let's pretend our 15 minutes was up. Ding, 15 minutes. They've been in the water 15 minutes. Again, this is personal preference, but what I like to do is I like to then stop, take 5 minutes. I turn off the heat under my pot, I take off the lid, and I wait 5 minutes. I let the jars just sit in the water, again, with the heat off for 5 more minutes, just to let them start to cool. And then I will remove them to maybe like a nice cloth like this, not just necessarily the bare countertop, which might be a little bit cold, but maybe a thing like this. I would just put my jar on, and then one is listening for the sound of them sealing, which does sound like this. Just sounds like. Now, these jars, I'm going to unpin my beautiful face for 1 minute, just to show you guys this. So, jars, when they are unsealed, they have this little button in the middle that you can press down and it makes this noise. When they are sealed, they don't have that button anymore. So this one I'm pressing, right? No button. And again, my favorite little party trick. Okay, we know this jar is sealed. It does sometimes happen that a jar will not seal. And maybe you made 4 jars and 3 sealed and 1 didn't. Maybe you made 6 jars and 5 sealed and 1 didn't. Maybe you made 4 jars and none of them sealed. Okay, what happens in that case? A couple things. And well, let me just take a step back and say, having maybe 1 jar in a batch not seal happens to me pretty frequently. And I'm on a lot of like canning forums and websites and chat groups and whatnot. And there's a lot of chit chat about, lids failing, lids not working. There's 2 possibilities. One, of course, is human error. I did something in my process that prevented the jar from sealing. The other is there is a possibility of a bum lid. And so either could be the case. What you want to do, well, let me put it this way. If one doesn't seal and the rest do, maybe that was the bum lid, right? But if none of them seal, it's like, I suppose it could be a whole bad batch. But then I would stop and say, did you do everything right? And those things that we were just going over, those are sort of the key points to making sure your jar is sealed. Don't overfill your jar. Leave that headspace, okay? Bubble the jar. Wipe that rim. Do all of those things. Be really conscientious. And you should have generally a pretty good success rate on a jar sealing. What if they don't seal? I really, really want to emphasize this because I've unfortunately had people say to me, oh, the jar didn't seal and so I threw out the contents. No, don't do that. If the jar doesn't seal, everything in it is still delicious and good, whether it's pickles, jam, it's wonderful. It's just not shelf stable. But you can put the unsealed lid on it or a different lid or whatever, keep it in your fridge. It's still beautiful jam. Give it to a neighbor. It's still marvelous pickles, whatever it is. Please don't throw it out, but also at the same time, please know it is not shelf stable. It needs to be refrigerated. So that's just one thing to, I want to make sure that I emphasize.
We have some more questions here, Emily. Somebody is asking, is there specific bottles to use for canning?
Yes, thank you. Yes, let's go into questions now at this point. This is a good moment to do this. So there are jars that are designed for home canning use. They will be labeled as such. Typically there's these just ball jars, mason jars, kind of what you think of. And they will be sold typically in a flat of 12. And they will be labeled for home canning use. As I mentioned at the top, Jewel is a good place to find them, particularly this time of year. Ace Hardware is a good place to find them. Craft stores sell them individually and desperately overprice them. I love Michael's, but not for jars. So yes, you really want to use jars designed, you must use jars designed for home canning use. Now, this again is the typical ball jar, 3 pieces, jar, lid, ring. Are there other kinds on the market? Absolutely. There are very fancy European gorgeous jars. There's Weck jars from Germany. There's the Quattro Stagione jars from Italy. They're beautiful. They sometimes have a different mechanism for the top. And you should they will have instructions and you need to follow those instructions. They're very beautiful. They're very expensive. If you're doing a lot of canning like me, just not cost effective. This is much more cost effective. And also in part because I tend to give away many of the things I can. So I'm never seeing those jars again. So again, I don't necessarily want to give them the super expensive jar. But excellent question. Do we have others?
Yes. So are the lids reusable?
These are great questions. Okay. The typical lids are not reusable for canning purposes. So you guys see this sealing compound. This is designed for a one-time use to be sealed. And once you unseal it, you don't want to use it again for canning. You can use it for storage. So to sort of demonstrate this is a jar I made right earlier this summer. I've shown this off now several times. This is sealed, right? I love doing this. I can't stop. If I were to break the seal right now, I don't want to do that. But if I were, either with my fingers or a sharp, tip of a knife. Okay. This lid, I will not use again for canning. I can leave it on the jar when I open it and stick it in the fridge. And let me emphasize that once you break that seal and open a jar, it now must go in the fridge, right? It's no longer shelf stable. It's shelf stable because it's vacuum sealed. Once you break that, perishable. So once I break that seal, I can leave it like this in the fridge and use this sort of for storage purposes, but not canning purposes. So I hope that's clear.
Yeah, and how long is the shelf stable life?
These are all dynamite questions. So the USDA says that our home canned goods are shelf stable up to 1 year. Now, between you and me, if it was good on day 364 and day 365, it's still good on day 366. Over time, you are going to have a deterioration in the quality. It's not going to taste as good if you let it sit for a year or two, or 3 or 4. But in terms of sort of food safety, one of the things that's really nice about this particular method of home food preservation is that if something goes wrong, you will know, okay? It will have visible mold. The seal will be broken. Sometimes if you have a bunch of, if you've done some canning and you are sure the jar sealed when it came out of the water, but then later on you go downstairs to the basement to get it out and the seal is broken and it's bubbling or something, that is not a safe jar. Something went awry in the process. Doesn't happen very often. I don't know that it's ever happened to me. But again, you will know if something has gone wrong from a food safety point of view. And obviously don't eat it at that point, whether it's been 2 weeks or 2 years. But other than that, if it's still sealed, it still looks good. It's going to be safe to eat even after a year, maybe not as delicious.
And after the seal is broken and you keep it in the fridge for how long?
Again, it'll probably be good for quite a long time in the fridge. Pickles like these, they're sitting in vinegar. So that already is like a preservative. And so that's going to be a long time. Same thing with jam. It's very high in sugar. Sugar's a preservative. And again, same idea. If you open a jar of jam, you use most of it, you pop it in the fridge, it sits in the back of the fridge, you forget about it for 6 months, and you come to it again, and there's mold or something that you see, obviously, please get rid of it. But if you don't see any visible mold, it doesn't taste off or smell funny, it's still good. It's still good, as long as it's been in the fridge.
Mary Miller is asking if you can make salsa in a water bath.
You can. Great question. So you can. It's not not necessarily like what you might think of, not like a pico de gallo type of salsa, but more like a cooked salsa. You can absolutely do. Now, I'm really glad you brought this up, Mary, because I want to quickly touch on this. So things like that are sort of mixed products, like a salsa or a chutney or a relish, they may safely be water bath canned, but it is really critically important for those type of items that you follow a tested recipe. And the reason is a thing like a salsa or a chutney or a relish, it will have mixed high acid and low acid ingredients typically. So it might have onions. Onions are a low acid ingredient, but it might have vinegar or tomatoes or lemon juice or lime juice. So it's a higher acid ingredient. So if you are following a recipe, that recipe will have been tested, literally like tested in the lab to make sure that it is a safe acidity level to can this way. And what you want to do is you want to find that recipe and you need to stick to it. You need to stick to the ratio. So if it's called for a cup of onions, I want you to really use that cup of onions and follow those proportions, because again, that will have been calibrated to that safe acidity.
Wonderful.
But I don't want to scare anyone. I just want you to follow the recipe.
And Gayatri is asking if it's possible to get notes for key points. Well, yes, Emily prepared a handout and I will email all participants the handout after this presentation is over. Also, the recording will be available on the library YouTube channel tomorrow. So yes, although you've done a great job, Emily. I mean, Now there's no secrets between me and pickles of any kind.
Thank you. That is exactly what I want to have happen. I really want to demystify this process, and take away the fear. It is easy. If you're, if you do anything in the kitchen, you can do this. It's a wonderful technique to know. It really can help prevent food waste. If you, if you're like, I've got all these green beans and we're going out of town and I don't know what to do this. If you are going to the Jewel and there's a big sale on green beans and you're like, oh, this is an amazing deal on green beans. So buy a lot, can some, serve some for dinner that night and can some. So it's a wonderful technique. And I think it's really enjoyable, and it can help you both avoid food waste and take advantage of some sales and also seasonality, right? Like when, the fruits in season, when the vegetables are in season, make that jam, make those pickles. The strawberry rhubarb jam I made on June 23rd of this year, and I'm going to open it in January, and I'm going to it's going to take me back to June. So it's just a fun activity.
Yeah, I have to say that I come from Romania, and we have always used like different lids on the jars. So when I moved here, I started pickling and making jams and all of that. And I didn't know about the seal, but I have to tell you, it worked even several times, and it lasted. I mean, the jams and I do some sort of an eggplant spread. I think even a year and a half. It was perfect. Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, people, as you say, people in Europe are absolutely doing this. I think the art of sort of preserving was never really lost in Europe the way it is here. They don't always follow the same safety procedures that we do. We're different. That's fine. It's a different society. So
yeah. That is true. Well, thank you so much, Emily. You were so sweet. You're a great presenter. I hope everybody enjoyed this program, and I will email everybody the handout, and hope to see you soon, Emily. Okay?
Thank you so much for having me. This was absolutely wonderful. And folks, anyone listening or anyone who hears this recording, if you have follow-up questions, you get in touch with Raluca. She knows how to get in touch with me. I'd be happy to answer more questions.
Oh, and also on the library website, on the description of this program, there's Emily's website, West of the Loops, and she has amazing recipes and photos. Oh, oops, we have another question coming up. Oh, thank you, Kristen, for joining us. I actually looked at some recipes today, and I found some feta something wraps. I don't know.
Ooh, the little feta, like little cigars.
They look delicious. Yeah. Okay. Well, happy holidays to everybody, and happy pickling, I guess.
Yes. Thank you so much again. This was delightful.
Yes. All right. Well, good night, everybody.
Good night.